Hello and welcome to my channel. Here I review new movies and television shows. Today, I want to talk about the movie On a Wing and a Prayer. It's about a real-life event that saw an airplane passenger take over the controls of a private flight when the pilot died. It's a retelling of events with a few added characters and changed details for dramatic effect, and it focuses heavily on the emotional aspects of the emergency rather than the physical. It was directed by Sean McNamara and written by Brian Egeston. It stars Dennis Quaid as Doug White, the lead character of the story, and Heather Graham as his wife Terry. The two are supported by a large cast of characters who split the screen time fairly evenly. The film starts off by introducing us to Doug White and his family and telling us a little bit about their lives and how they got to be on this particular flight. Then, after about a half hour of that, things kick off, and Doug becomes the main pilot. From there, there's a lot of back and forth between Doug and the different people involved in trying to help him land the plane. They try to get him to do something, but say it in too technical a way. Doug reminds them he's a normal person, and then they lay it out in layman's terms. The story repeats this sequence a few times, interspersed with scenes of Doug and his family being scared and trying to comfort and encourage each other. There's one little crisis on the plane that gets worked out, and there are also a couple of B storylines. All of it is super predictable and filled with mentions, images, and outright references to Christianity. This movie is very religious. The B storylines are incredibly short, lack a lot of detail, and don't have a clear reason for existing. For example, there are a couple of kids that follow the events and were shown their perspective through the emergency. They aren't related to anyone involved and they aren't helping in any way. They're just an audience. The main storyline isn't very exciting and involves a lot of overdramatic talking between Doug and the air traffic controllers. The jargon they use might be accurate, I don't really know, but it doesn't serve a purpose other than to be authentic. They repeated a lot of dialogue and didn't convey the meaning clearly and concisely. It might be based on a real story, but I don't think they did a good job of telling that real story. It isn't clear what Doug's really doing as the pilot. We also skip around between characters a lot, and it isn't always clear why. They also spend more time than necessary introducing each of them, and it makes the movie feel bloated. It's confusing, and other than being dramatic, it doesn't have much to offer, story-wise. Despite that, the cast is doing an impeccable job of selling it, Dennis Quaid especially. He gets most of the screen time and plays Doug White in the most human way possible. He's playing a middle-aged pharmacist with a young family who is going through a crisis of faith. Quaid looks a little old for the role, but he nails the emotions of it anyway. There's one scene at the end where he finally lets everything overwhelm him, and it was a truly touching moment between him and the camera. Heather Graham plays Doug's supportive wife Terry, a strongly religious woman who spends her time helping Doug work through the instructions they're given and helping keep their two daughters calm. She gets the most screen time after Quaid and does a good job in her role. The rest of the cast sees their time split fairly evenly, with most of the adults playing people who worked at the airports. They try their best to talk Doug through landing the plane, and we learn a bit about their personalities and lives. Everyone pulls it off well. Visually, this film is kind of boring and confusing. There are two aspects to the visual journey: the conversations between the characters and the physical journey of the plane. The dramatic conversations are well captured, and we get a good sense of the gravity of the emergency from the cast's demeanor. It falls apart when later in the film they end up introducing too many characters and the film starts endlessly flipping back and forth between them. It gets messy fast. As for the plane, we rarely see the outside, and when we do, it's clearly a CGI creation. The sky background looks static and flat when compared to the plane, and they didn't manage to capture the plane's journey in a way that makes sense. I was never sure of where they were, what kind of weather they were flying in, or how they were moving. The characters are never thrown by turbulence and don't seem to respond to the momentum changes that occur throughout. At one point, they're nosediving toward the earth, and the wife is standing behind the pilot completely unaffected by the motion. She would have been bouncing around that cockpit like a pinball. Sound-wise, there are a lot of original catchy tunes in here and some big emotional moments that are amplified by the instrumental background tracks. The soundtrack is good at following the emotions and at being significant, but it also gets overused to the point of diminishing returns. There are a lot of country western songs, a few rock and roll numbers, and an overload of tension-building tracks. They end up trying to force just a little bit more sense of danger out of the scenery, and by the end of the film, none of it feels dangerous because the story is predictable and the dangerous music is always on. You get numb to it quickly. Overall, the film is another dramatic story of survival that puts out some rich emotions and ties it to a heavy Christian theme. It's predictable, and the story isn't all that tight, but there is enough here to enjoy if you like this kind of feel-good movie. It's not trying anything new, and quite honestly, this movie could have been made in the 70s and looked just as good with practical effects. If you don't mind having Jesus shoved down your throat and you like emotions, then this is an okay movie. 5 out of 10. Remember guys, those are just my thoughts on the film. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And praise be to Jesus!